Do you want to work in the tech space and not sure if you want to work at big tech companies or at startups? Today I'm going to go through the pros and cons of both. Let's jump right into it. So let's talk about big tech companies first. The first pro about working at a big tech company is that these companies are at the forefront of innovation. They're probably the champions in their spaces and their industries. Companies like, the FANG companies, you got the Ubers and the Lyfts, and you got the other companies of that similar size and of that similar success. These companies are the ones that I would consider to be big tech. Now, these FANG companies and the like are really, really large, so they have the resources and the means to continue to push and innovate in their respective spaces. Another pro about big tech companies is that they are resume builders. Now, what do I mean by that? These brand name companies are nice to have on your resume. And when recruiters or when employees see that you have one of these companies on your resume, they probably think that, oh, you might have worked on some really cool projects. You could have worked on some really impactful things for really large companies. And when you have one of these companies on your resume, it's kind of an eye catcher. Now, there are some caveats to this, because just because you're at one of these large companies doesn't mean you're necessarily working on something super impactful or something that's kind of pushing the edge or on the cutting edge. But you do have that added benefit of having that name on your resume. And typically these companies probably have high standards and tough interview processes. So if you've gotten through them, you must know what you're doing. Or can at least fake it, am I right? Another pro of working at a big tech company is the competitive pay and the benefits. So these companies generally have, as I mentioned, the resources to hire the best talent in the industry. And the way you get the best talent is you have to pay. One of the reasons top talent in the industry are really attracted to these big tech companies is because of the competitive packages that they're able to offer. This includes the base salary, it includes a base structure, it could include equity, and it could also include many different perks and benefits that come along with the package as well. Typically, if you're working at these big companies, their equity packages are really, really valuable. And add that on top of the base and the bonus, that's a really lucrative opportunity you have in front of you. Now, last but not least, another big pro about a big tech company is the ability to move internally. Internal mobility is really important when you want to be able to have the flexibility to work on different projects when you're at a specific company. So let's say you were hired to work on project X. Once that project is completed or that project is in maintenance mode, you'll have the ability to move internally and explore different areas of the company because they're large enough to have those resources and those projects to continue innovating. Now that we talked about some of the pros of big tech, let's talk about some of the cons. One of the cons about working at big tech is that because they're so large and established, there's a lot of company bureaucracy and politics that gets in the way of the work. When you have a project in mind that you know will be really impactful, you're going to have to get the buy-in of a lot of different stakeholders, and that usually takes time, not just weeks, but even up to months. All of these big tech companies have started at that startup stage at one point. And when they were at that small, seed stage or even like in late stage, they were moving super quick. But now that there's a bunch of processes in place and there are steps to getting things done, things tend to take a little bit more time. Another con of working at a big tech company is that the scope and the impact of your role may not be as large as you might want it to be. At large tech companies, there are many different teams working on many different things. So the team that you were hired for may just be working on a really small piece of the puzzle when you look at the grand scheme of things. There definitely are those teams at big tech companies that are pushing the boundaries, that are innovating, as I said earlier. And these teams are definitely attractive, but not everybody will be able to get to work on these things. And because of this, a lot of the times your role is going to be siloed into a specific function. Therefore, if you're looking to wear a lot of different hats, or if you want to get involved in more than one thing at a time, those opportunities may not always be there because they have fully established teams that'll be able to fill those roles when needed. Hit the like button below if you thought that this was helpful. And if you work at big tech companies, let me know what I've been missing. Cool, so we talked about the pros and cons of big tech companies. Now let's talk about the pros and cons of startups. One of the greatest things about being able to work at a startup is your ability to have impact on day one. So this means that your expertise will have direct impact onto the company's product or onto their bottom line. And not only are you going to be working on impactful projects, but you'll get to wear a lot of different hats. Most of the time, startups don't have fully fleshed out teams that big tech companies do, so you're going to get to flesh a lot and grow a lot of different muscles. Another pro about working at a startup is that things tend to move really quickly. Now, this is really exciting. You'll get to test things out, experiment, iterate on projects or on initiatives and be scrappy and fast-paced. All of these things are relevant in the startup world. Which leads me to another pro about working at startups. Startups could be huge resume builders as well, because you're working on such impactful and meaningful projects that have direct impact onto the success of a company. The breadth of your experience that you gain at a startup will be really attractive to future employers. Now let's talk about some of the cons about working at a startup. There's always an inherent risk when you join a startup company. You always have to remember that these companies aren't as established as the FAANGs of the world or those really large tech companies. So the stability of your role or the company is always in question. For those that are really, really hungry and want to have an impact at a company, they are motivated to do the best that they can in order to directly tie to the success of their company and push it forward. So with that being said, there is an inherent opportunity cost about joining a startup. Something else you have to keep in mind about working at a startup is that the compensation packages aren't going to be as competitive as big tech companies. Now, I do say this with a slight caveat. There are startups that are in usually late stages that are able to be competitive with these big tech companies. But typically, when startups are just trying to get off the ground, when they're in their early rounds of seed funding, it could be difficult to be able to dish out huge comp packages to land strong talent. You have to consider this when you think about equity, especially because you never know if the company's ever going to be liquid. This is why at startups, you'll typically find a lot of people who are just hungry and are hustlers to want to make their company successful, so they'll give it all they got. Now, a final thing about startups is that internal mobility may not be as easy as these big established tech companies. And this isn't really because these companies don't want to provide you these other opportunities and move internally to, try out new teams or work on new projects. It's mostly because the teams or the projects that you want to work on may not even exist at the moment. When you see startups grow and become a little bit more established, then these internal mobility opportunities will become available. And more often than not, you'll be able to spearhead the beginning of a new group, which is really exciting. Let me know in the comment section below if you work at a startup and if I'm missing anything in this pros and cons list. So we just talked about the pros and the cons of working at big tech companies versus at startups. I hope this information helps you make your decision on what kind of company you want to work for. Now, you should definitely continue to do your research because there are companies that are somewhere within this spectrum of like a straight startup versus a large tech company. At the end of the day, you really have to think about what's most important to you. All right, y'all, I hope you enjoyed this quick video and I hope it was really helpful. Let me know in the comment section below if there's something that I've missed or if there's something that you want me to go into more detail about. And also if there's other topics that regard recruiting or the tech industry that you want to hear some more about. Don't forget to smash that like button and I'll see you in the next video.